Okay, well, our guest speaker today is Tyler Moore. Tyler was born and raised in Payson, Utah, in a family of entrepreneurs. With a diverse background spanning industries from construction to culinary, he has found his passion in the insurance sector. He's married with 3 kids and recently turned 31, so he's not too far away from where most of you are. He studied business at LDS Business College, now Ensign College, and is deeply involved in the community, volunteering on local school boards and the Planning Commission. He's the past president of his BNI, Business Networking International chapter. Tyler has won numerous awards as a top insurance agent and consistently ranking in the top 3 agencies since opening his agency in 2019. He believes that every experience, especially mistakes, is an opportunity to learn and grow. So please welcome Tyler Moore.
Awesome. Thank you. So, just a second here. Should be good. Yeah. Cool. Thanks. All right. So, oh, hang on, I forgot one of these. Okay. Can you hear me better? There we go. Okay, cool. So yeah, like was mentioned, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. Was anyone here? I think it was a month or so ago when my mom, Lorraine Moore, was here. She talked about like the perfect pitch, Inigo Montoya. Anyone ring a bell? Nope. Okay.
It was in the workshop that we
Oh,
held.
was that it? Okay. Don't worry about it. I'm cooler anyways. No, just kidding. Okay. All right. So, I want you guys to, basically something I want to talk about today is actually the values of you and your business. That was something that made a huge difference for me when I was starting my business. Have you ever met somebody that really was driven by their values? Okay, see some heads nodding. Okay, so someone raise their hand and tell me what was something that made you realize, yeah, they're really driven by this value. They're really motivated to do X, Y, Z. Yeah.
They would sacrifice their time for whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example. That's my wife. So sometimes when I get really focused on something at work, I will sit there and I will work on it, and then all of a sudden I notice it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. And so that's how she defines something for me, is she says, hey, is that something that is so important that it needs to be done at 2 or 3 in the morning? And half the time I'm like, no, probably not. But there's definitely a lot of times in a business where I'm like, yeah, you know what? This is probably something I need to keep working on. So yeah, that's a great one. Okay. So I believe that everyone's driven by a set of values. It is what helps us work together. It's also what makes us fight sometimes. Values are what we remember, or what stands out to us when we hear somebody's message, when we hear. Side note, has anyone heard? Does anyone know Simon Sinek? Okay, a couple people. So I'm actually going to come back to him, but he has a great talk on YouTube. If you just Google "Start with Why," you'll find a ton of really good information on this. He's got books and stuff, all sorts of stuff about it. But it really drills down to what is most important when you're talking to people. So I'm actually going to come back to that later. First, is anyone in here a painter, like a commercial painter, not art? We're not talking like Van Gogh. We're talking like Sherman Williams. Anyone done anything like that? Okay. Did you like the job? Okay. I hated any kind of painting I ever did, so I may make jokes about it. Don't take it personally. So everyone's got kind of a grandparent or someone who really affected their lives. Doesn't necessarily need to be a grandparent, but someone who affected their lives. That is kind of where the story begins for me. So my grandpa, his dad was a painter. He absolutely hated it. So anytime there was a job to do painting around the house or something like that, he'd ask one of the grandkids to do it, because even if we did a bad job, it was better than him having to do it. So that's my grandpa. So this is him as a kid, little guy there. So his dad was a painter, made him do it a lot as a kid. And he said, you know what, I'd rather join the army than work as a painter. So that was what he did. Joined the army. He went all over the world, ended up spending most of the time throughout France. It wasn't during wartime, so he actually got to do a side gig, worked as a bartender a lot. If you ever come to our house, we have a big shot glass collection. We tell my mom, I swear, they're just grandpa's. I don't really use them. But he worked as a mechanic, and he learned a lot of kind of crazy ways to fix things, really out of the box thinking. He had a Jeep, I don't have a picture of, but he had a Jeep that it had like 3 different batteries just in the engine bay, because when one would die, he'd slap a new one on there and never actually take out the old one. So a lot of funny stuff like that. But he came home and he started a heating and air conditioning business with his family. So him and his wife and his 3 sons. I just realized I've got that picture in there twice. But anyway, so he worked with them for, the business ended up running for, I think it was 48 years. And you had Rick, who was on the sales side of things. You had Randy, who was the office, kind of the back end. Anytime a part needed to be built or made, he was the guy. And then you had my dad, Robert, and he was over the customer service side of things. If you needed something fixed, he's the one that was going out to your house and fixing it. And so anyway, so that was the business that I grew up into. That's me, the cute little guy there. Crazy story, my son looks just like that. But so he ended up growing that business, and I worked there for about, I don't know, 4 years or so, and saved up a ton of money and got this awesome car. I finally turned 16. If anyone's seen Fast and Furious, Paul's green car in the beginning, that was my car. It was pretty sweet. And less than a week later, I crashed it. There's no audio, but just imagine me crying in the background here. So yeah, had it for a solid week. And I forgot, I should have clipped off some of the beginning of this, but yeah, they ended up totaling the car. I was in pieces. Let's see. But yeah, so I had a friend who his name was Sam, and he he knew that I had this car. He knew that I crashed it, and that this was the end of it. That was like 4 or 5 years worth of work, all gone. So anyways, he came up to me one summer, and he's like, basically it was the summer after, he's like, man, you're doing a lot better. I noticed you were like super depressed when you crashed your car. And I was like, well, as much as I was, that wasn't actually why I was going through a hard time there. At the time, my grandpa, he was actually battling esophageal cancer. And going back about a year, I actually, if anyone knows what a hiatal hernia is, it's a super small thing in your esophagus. Not a big deal. 90% of the time, actually like 99% of the time, not a problem at all. But they had found one of those in me, and I knew that he had one. When I found out he had cancer, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got cancer. So I'm like freaking out. But going back to working at the shop, I remember walking around the back of the shop with a broom. I'm kind of pretending like I'm working, not actually doing anything. But he was walking back, going to do something else. And instead of ripping into me saying, what the heck are you doing? Because I had seen him do that to quite a few of my cousins. So I kind of expected that. But instead he paused, took a minute to say, hey, what's going on? Here, let me show you how you're supposed to work a broom. So he was really good about doing that, about pointing out when you did something wrong, when you needed to hear that, but also being gentle about it when you did need to. So, let's see. So jump ahead. So so my uncle was actually the first one that we found out that he had this cancer. And anyway, so he went from about 300-ish pounds all the way down to about 145-ish pounds. He lost a ton of weight. He definitely barely survived, but he was stage 3. And they had to do a lot of procedures to help him. This picture right here was about an hour and a half before my grandpa got the call on Thanksgiving that that they had found it in him as well, and he had stage 4. So it was a huge shock to the family, and yeah, so it took him. So he over the next 6 months, he fought like crazy. Anything he could do, they did all sorts of procedures. Most of the time with people, you can just kind of cut out a chunk of the esophagus and replace it with other parts. He had already had quite a few surgeries prior to that, so he wasn't able to. His medical bills totaled over $750,000. And that was the first time I really understood what insurance was, what it does, how it helps a family. He actually had it for the whole business. But between him and my uncle, they ended up racking up so much in medical bills that the insurance company ended up not renewing them later on. Now that's illegal, but at the time it was a pretty rough thing. Sadly, this was actually the last photograph that we had of him. It was probably only a week or two later that he ended up passing away. And going back to that friend of mine, Sam, that was the first time he found out that my grandpa had passed away. Sorry, and what an impact that he had on my life. I definitely would never have started a business had it not been for him. Many other, like I said, many other family members of mine had also started businesses, but like half of them had failed. He showed me a way that you start a business, you really focus on what's important, and it provides a good lifestyle for you and your family. Yeah, let's see. Okay, so we're going to pause the pictures for a second here. But fast forward, graduated high school, went on a mission, ended up going to Ensign College, which was then LDS Business College. And I studied entrepreneurship, and I had a teacher, super awesome. He started out the semester saying, hey, just so everyone knows, everyone's here to learn how to start a business, but a huge majority of you are going to end up leaving this semester realizing that is a terrible idea. I would never want to do that in my life. And he was pretty well right. Most of the class ended up realizing they did not want to. I was definitely on the roller coaster. I started out like, oh yeah, someday I want to do that. And a quarter of the way through, I was like, man, that is the dumbest idea anyone could come up with. Like, why would you do that? By the end of the semester, though, I did definitely learn to appreciate, yeah, there's a lot of hard work, but it's also very rewarding. At the time, I was working at the Joseph Smith building as one of their banquet chefs, and I was dead set that was the guy that I was working underneath, the head chef. He was exactly what I was hoping to get into. I wanted to start a restaurant, do what he was doing. I thought that was the gig for me. After working through Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's with him there, I realized that his job was 10 times worse than anything I had imagined. It was so rough. Again, it's kind of what you value, but some people love it. He loved it. He did great at it, but I was like, nope, that is not for me. So that's when I was back looking for another career. Around that time, I got married and was introduced to, the guy that had actually been doing my insurance for a couple of years. For the sake of the story, we're going to call him Colin. But he did our health insurance at the time. And he said, hey, my business is growing. I've got more leads coming in that I know what to do with. So do you want to come and take on some of these leads? So I definitely feel like I got lucky there. I think any successful business, there's definitely a hefty amount of luck that is thrown into that mix. But yeah, he gave me a great jump start to what I was doing. And between the time that I met Colin for the first time in person, which was like in January, and the time that I got my insurance license, which was about 5-ish months later, we found out that we were expecting our first child. So super excited, but I didn't know. I started doing insurance and I didn't know if this was what was going to stick. I don't think I had had a job longer than 6 months prior to that, other than working for family, of course. But all I knew is I needed to provide for my family. And I was doing my best to bring home the bacon. At the time, it was more like just bringing home bacon bits, because that year they actually did not pay us for quite a few months. They had this weird rule where if you sold a policy anytime outside of October, November, and December, they actually wouldn't pay you. And so, so I worked all the way from June until January before actually receiving commissions on anything. However, Colin was super awesome. He gave me a advance, basically, so I wasn't starving. But yeah, anyway, it was really hard. And I had a lot of people come up to me and say, hey, I heard you're getting into insurance. Just know the first 3 years are the worst. You're doing anything you can to survive those first 3 years. And I think a lot of that is because you really are starting a business. Even if you're working for someone, if you're working strictly on commission, you're basically starting a business there, at least when it comes to insurance. So as we grew, we started out with the agreement that at some point I would start my own agency. I didn't know what that would be, what that would look like, but as we grew, I knew that at some point I was going to want to do that. So with that, the advance that he gave me, there were some strings attached. I had to work for him for 3 years. Not a big deal, because like most people had said, you're lucky if you survive 3 years anyways. But one thing that we never really did is figured out what we wanted our values to be, or at least I didn't know what they were. If he had an idea, I had no idea. The only things that we really valued there at the time was saving people the most money possible, doing it whatever way we can, and just getting the job done. Nothing wrong there. So it was nice to have that beginning. But as we grew, Colin, his ideas and the things that motivated him, I feel like it changed. Maybe that's what motivated him before, but it definitely looked like it changed. So the more that we grew, the more money that we got in, he seemed to care more about the money than the actual people that we were helping out. And so that was one of the first lessons to me of when you're not following those values, or when your values aren't really aligned with who your clients were. Some of the clients could see it, some of them couldn't. The biggest concern for me was, well, we're kind of floating some gray areas here on whether these sales are ethical or whether this or that is legal. Nothing we did was necessarily legal, but it was definitely borderline unethical. And that definitely bothered me. I tried to step out of the situation as much as I could, but it was hard because I was also training agents at the time, and I'd be teaching one thing, and then Colin would be saying, hey, well, why don't you just go do this, this, and this? And I was like, well, because the family doesn't need 10 policies. You can just do one policy and save them a lot more money. And he's like, well, yeah, but if you sell them the 10 policies, you get more money. I was like, well, what if I don't care about that? That's not what's important here. So we had that was kind of the start of some of the disagreements. Insurance has uplines. If you've ever seen an MLM, It looks very similar to the insurance industry, not gonna lie. You have your base level agents, and they typically work for an agency, and then that agency contracts with what they call an FMO. And that FMO is actually who gets you contracted with the companies, the carriers like the Select Health or Molina, whoever. So Colin actually found a upline FMO that really aligned with a lot of the stuff that that he was kind of more changing into. And that was a really hard process for me because that was when I realized, oh, this is a big separation from my personal values and what we're doing right here. There's a bunch of situations, but the one that really bothered me was they have these. I think good easy way to explain it, but basically they have these companies that you can work with. It's called a health share. You have to basically be a part of their religion or believe the same things that they do to get those policies or sell them. And I didn't believe what this company believed. And so I was not able to be contracted with them. And Colin and the upline basically said, oh, no, just lie to him on the thing. Just go ahead and tell him you believe this X, Y, and Z, and you're good. But that did not sit well with me at all. So that was one of the first things. Like I said, a bunch of other situations, but that was when I really started to hatch the idea for Lions Pride Insurance. I needed a name for the sake of like tax purposes to create an LLC. I ended up landing on that, and the more I worked with it, the more I liked it. So then summer rolls around, and I realized that, okay, I don't know if I'm making the right step or not. I kind of given up on actually stepping out and doing the business. But then a good friend of mine named Ryan, he asked me if I'd ever had the idea of starting an agency. I was like, yeah, I've considered it. And we talked a little more about it. And he's like, dude, you've already built the agent. Like, you literally built out everything. I had the website practically ready. All I had to do was like pay for the domain and it was good to go. There are a few other things. So anyways, I took the leap. Colin was not happy. My wife was not happy. My in-laws were definitely not happy. They had never really been ones to jump into a business like that, but my family was. So my family was like, go for it. It'll be great for you. But it was definitely rough. So, sorry. So anyways, we actually started as more of a franchise agreement, and I feel like there were enough red flags I shouldn't have, because like I said, there's deviation on the values. Like, we're not thinking the same thing. But I was like, I still feel like I need his support with all this. We tried that agreement for about 6 months, and I was sending him 20% of everything that we made. So we were only making 80% of all the dollars we had worked to get. But they weren't really supporting us at all. So after about 6 months, we parted ways with them. And it's been probably one of the best decisions that we made for Lions Pride Insurance as a whole. So, anyway, so coming back to Simon Sinek, I mentioned, he's got this circle. You kind of can't see half of it, but it starts out with why, and then you work your way outward into how. So why do you do what you do? How do you do what you do? And then what is it you actually do? So he gives cool examples like Apple and Microsoft. Microsoft is known for Microsoft is known, or at the time I should say, was known for saying, hey, we have the best GPU or the best processor, we have the best XYZ. And so we're better than Apple. And at the time, Apple was a lot more doing what he was saying and saying, we make computers for teachers, for people who are creative and who are doing X, Y, and Z, and really focusing on why they need a computer, not why they're the best. And so that really inspired me as I was starting Lions Pride Insurance to go through a very very methodically figure out what were my values, what did I want to be, what did I want Lions Pride to be, and it was not an easy process. So, um, sorry, where did it go? So one of the things that I knew that I wanted, because of my past experience, was that I wanted to make sure that we were very focused on being transparent and having integrity in what we did, but also making things very simple. And so that's a big part of our company values. I went onto Simon Sinek's website because I wanted to see how he did what he did, on like how does he present himself. And I think it's really interesting because you don't really get a sense of it, but this is scrolling down on his website. So the first thing he does on his About Us page is our just cause. This is why he does what he does. He says, we believe the best way to build this world is to commit to building it together. So that's his why. How he does it, he's got a set of values. And that's what drives how he does everything, how he makes decisions. And then the last part on that page is what we do. So he finally gets around to here's what we do. Here's how you can contact us. Here's what you can learn. You can take classes, watch keynotes, books, podcasts, you name it. He's got it. And so, anyway, so that was what I tried to do, is really find out ways to figure out the values that I wanted in my business and how that would translate into what I was trying to do. So at first I thought the most important thing was the brand, the marketing, what all that looks like. And so I worked with a guy and he helped me really think through, okay, you want to be trustworthy. So let's put some blue in the logo because people just associate blue with trustworthiness. I wanted to be more than just your boring insurance guy because I've met many of them, and trust me, they are a boring bunch. They're probably less boring than accountants, but depends on the day. Depends on if it's tax season or not, honestly. So we went through all this stuff, but it really always came back to what are our values? What is it that we specifically want to be? And I've noticed since then that that's how we drive all the marketing that we do now. We do a ton of community events, but we're always asking ourselves, how does that accomplish our values and our goals and our mission there? So I got a couple other things, but I'm curious if you guys have any questions. What questions do you have about values and like how that applies to a business, or any others if you got them? Yeah.
What would you say are the best ways you can communicate strong values to other people to have your values almost instilled in them?
So think, and again, this is another example where Apple is a really good example of it. If you go into an Apple store, you know exactly what to expect. Same thing with McDonald's and a lot of the other big businesses is they've worked so much on the feel of what they're going for. So that comes down to how your people act. A lot of that I feel like is hiring as well. I didn't realize early on how important the people that I hired was, which kind of sounds dumb because they're the ones who are helping you run the business. But the first like 2 people I hired were not committed to the vision that what we were trying to accomplish, and so it just kind of fell by the wayside for them. But once I was able to find people that were really committed to that and really driven to have that same set of values and do that, it made it easy because I could just say, okay, we've got this. For instance, we do a bunch of client parties because we really value our clients sending us referrals. And so I can just say, hey, we want to do a couple of client parties, and they know the feel that we're going for. I wish I could quantify it more than that, but it's a lot about the feel that you're going for. That's why I feel like branding is very important, because it helps people see you in the first 5 seconds that they come in contact with you to know what that feel is and who you're trying to be. So I hope. Do you have a question too?
Yeah, I was going to ask what is it that your values, how do they actually change your operations or what you do or don't do?
Yeah. So actually going to just pull up my own website. So on here, we've got our values here. So we've got remember the worth of family, the value of service, be accountable and trustworthy, to build a strong foundation, to grow with purpose every day, to share knowledge kindly, and remember you are who you choose to be. One of those is a movie quote. I got $5 for anyone that can pick it out. Anyways, they every time we go through and do an event of any kind or a big project, at the end of it, we do an after action report. And we say, okay, what was why were we doing that? And we identify one of these and the big reason why we were doing that. So a lot of times the client events that we do, like this summer, we rented out what used to be Seven Peaks Splash Summit. We rented out Splash Summit, had everyone bring their families. We had like 600 people come. It was a lot of fun. But our big focus was to get the families there. We wanted to interact with the families, let them have a fun time. So that helped us decide, because that was number one on our list. Some other examples is we actually read to kindergarten classes like every other month. And so we try to share knowledge with them. We go into the schools and we find ways to help the STEM classes, whether that be sponsor a field trip or help pay for software for them to learn about space or whatever it is. What other questions or thoughts do you guys have? Yeah.
What's your target market?
So to get really, really specific down to one person would be a husband and wife that are having their first or second child. They are trying to figure out the ins and outs of insurance for the first time. Most likely they're between 23 and 26, because that's usually when people are getting insurance for the very first time. So yeah, and that's also something that kind of I didn't realize until we started working with them is the group that gives me the most drive personally. Because when I started doing insurance was when we were having our first kid. And so talking with people and them asking, well, man, if we're going to have this baby, is it going to cost us $7,000? It's like, no, we'll do this and this, and it'll only cost you $3,000. And suddenly they're like, wow, I've got like $4,000 now. I can afford a crib. Maybe we can afford to actually move into a place that's got a second bedroom instead of this little one-bedroom apartment. So that's typically our target audience there. Also, we've got a few other factors that are, to be more specific, is like Utah County, and if their income is less than $60,000 is usually what we're aiming for. But we can help tons of people outside of that, but that's typically when we're designing a lot of our marketing, it's geared towards specifically that. So, yeah. Good question. What else?
That's probably all the time we have.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, if you got any questions, definitely feel free to let me know.